So here at Refold, we're always on the lookout for new tools, new ideas, new methods that are on the scene, things that might be useful to our learners. And we started talking to the Get Iago team probably 2-3 months now at this point, 2-3 months ago. And they are creating a new Chrome extension and website to go along with it, as a tool that is similar to other tools in the space. But it's really clean. It's really nice to use and friendly to use. And after playing with it for a while, we're like, oh yeah, this would definitely be a good tool for learners. And so we invited them on the live stream to talk about Iago, about their history with building. So I want to introduce Alex and Zero. So welcome to the stream.
Yeah, nice to meet you.
Yeah. Thanks for making time on a Saturday. I appreciate it. Cool. So in your own words, I don't know who wants to take these questions, but I'll just throw them out there and you can choose. In your own words, what is Iago?
Yeah, so I think just to start off, Iago kind of allows you to learn languages by watching your favorite TV shows and kind of specifically do subtitles and sentence mining. We're kind of similar to like Language Reactor and Igago in that aspect, that you can hover over any kind of subtitle and see kind of specifically how that subtitle breaks up into tokens or words that you can hover and see the definitions of, similar to like an interactive dictionary as well. But I think what we do different is we also really want to add the emphasis on grammar and context clues, kind of sprinkling the stuff that you would learn from a textbook into kind of your immersion-based learning kind of experience.
Yeah, kind of like the idea is that not just to understand the sentence itself, but really understand why a sentence is composed that way so you can actually reuse that knowledge later on. We're also making it easier to review the words grammar you actually seen from the video as well. We want to do our own space repetition quiz, which I have on the website as well. Kind of like Anki, but we want it to be more automated, integrated into your flow of watching videos.
Got it. Before we get into the app itself, how about you all do a quick introduction? Tell us a little bit about your background with language learning and how you got into this project. So we'll start with Alex.
Yeah, I can start. So yeah, I'm Alex. Basically, I think it was basically learned. So I was basically born in Taiwan. Zero was there as well, and I learned Mandarin actually as my second language, kind of mainly through immersion. I mean, being in the country, but also through TV shows as a way to kind of learn the language. We'll talk about how we built Iago as we started learning Japanese or third language, but a bit more context about me. Zero and I both met at Robinhood, where we both worked on kind of new markets and international growth. And that's kind of where we bonded over our interest in kind of learning different languages.
Yeah, I kind of had like a reverse experience of what Alex had. Like most people in Taiwan have Chinese as their primary language, and I actually learned English in my secondary actually, just by watching a lot of TV shows back then, Star Trek, Friends, whatever you can think of in the 90s. That's probably I watched that and how I acquired this more normal California accent. But yeah, this is kind of how I started with language learning and come to the States, also work at Robinhood and Twitter before. I also went to Japan a lot, and I just want to being able to actually speak Japanese, especially in the countryside of Japan. So this is kind of how I got into starting learning Japanese about a couple of years ago, and kind of think about, hey, why don't we basically have the same experience of how I learn English myself, but actually build a tool that allow more people to use it.
Got it. I'm just curious, was there one TV show that was your favorite in the target language that you learned through immersion?
For me personally, that has to be Star Trek. I literally watch every single different series of Star Trek.
Which one's your favorite?
Probably the Voyager, but
really
love Captain.
That's an unusual favorite. Cool. Yeah, no, I'm a big Star Trek fan. My mom was a big Star Trek fan, and so
nice.
It was funny. We used to do this. There was a local TV station, and they would air Star Trek, and then they would do this promo, but a local city promo. So it was people in the city who would get all dressed up, and they would talk about the show. And so she was one of the hosts of the show. So she had her whole costume and everything.
Wow.
And they invited me on one time, and I just ran around as a child, like a 6-year-old. But how about you, Alex? Any Mandarin shows that you remember?
So it wasn't Mandarin in particular, but honestly, when I was young, we had a lot of Cartoon Network, Nickelodeon shows in Mandarin. So SpongeBob in Mandarin honestly was a good one when I was learning as a kid.
SpongeBob is a good one. It's one that ages well, and also ages well as you get into adulthood, because there's a lot of great jokes in it.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Got it. And so have you ever tried to learn any other languages? You mentioned Japanese, of course. Any other ones?
Not, yeah, I think that specifically Japanese. I think I guess me in particular, a lot of it, just because I learned English first, a lot of like my childhood was learning Mandarin kind of on the side as well.
I have kind of wish list for what's next. Could be either Korean or Spanish, given that we live in California, and also we probably work on Korean next as well. I just want to like, get a little bit more familiar with the local knowledge. So
yeah, definitely same here. My mom actually is like born and raised in Korea. She's not Korean, but she was born and raised there, and so definitely I go back a lot. And so being able to speak Korean there would be great.
Got it. Cool. And so, what do you feel is your personal language learning philosophy? And then how does that actually impact the app that you're building?
Yeah. So I think the biggest thing that we wanted to focus on was, I think language learning or, like learning a new habit takes a lot of time in the day. And I think really our goal is to kind of ease you into that flow as smooth as possible. And so that was kind of the philosophy we wanted to initially apply with Iago, whereas, a lot of people were already kind of watching content in the language that they're interested in. Japanese in particular has a lot of, pop culture content, anime and dramas that people are interested in. So we wanted to make everything kind of smooth as possible. So the subtitles would appear on the screen in both the language you're trying to learn, in this case, Japanese and English, but we try not to clutter the screen. Everything is kind of opt-in. So the user can kind of hover over subtitles or words that they're interested in, but they can still watch the entire show, in the way that they would originally watch it.
Yeah, I think the other big part is that I myself is like a really lazy learner. I don't want to spend too much time on doing something particularly every day and like for a really long time. So for me, it's like, how do I maximize the time I'm already using on something else? In our case, we'll be watching TV shows right now. It could be other things in the future. But the idea is that the self-learning is sometimes like lack of some like things you acquire from textbook, like grammars or like how do you put the sentence together, two and twos and whatsoever. We want to kind of like sprinkle that into the system as well. That's why we're doing the grammar stuff, like making sure that not only do you understand like, oh, those are words, but also why, it looks like this as well. And I feel like this is something that we can actually do while you're watching the shows and doing the immersions. It doesn't have to be a separate session. And that's kind of how we started this immersion layer.
Got it. Yeah, it's interesting. I'm not sure if you were watching the stream live, but we just had this question about grammar, right? And one of the things that we've seen with our immersion learners is that they get very good at understanding, but you don't actually need to notice all of the grammar in a sentence in order to understand it. Like usually, like if you get 100% of the vocabulary and 50% of the grammar, you're good enough.
Yeah, I think I kind of noticed that as in my own learning of English as well. Like at the beginning, having a grammar structure really helped me like anchors a sentence into how do I understand this sentence. But as time passes by, now I speak English, I don't really think about grammars anymore. You kind of want to get to the point where grammar is just a passive things. But it's really useful for beginner or intermediate people, like starting learning a new language, something to anchor towards.
Yeah, definitely. One of the core ideas that we've pushed is this idea of noticing, where if you can't notice something and you can't pick it out of a sentence, then your brain will never pick up on it enough to embed in your subconscious. Yeah. And so I think that integrating grammar noticing into the tool, I think, is a way for just making it known to your brain that this thing exists so that you can pay attention to it, which I think leads to the next phase of actually acquiring it. So I agree with that philosophy, and it's something that I feel like existing tools don't do particularly well. Though I have heard, I don't use a lot of the Japanese tools because I'm not studying Japanese, but I have heard that Yomi-chan does do some grammar highlighting, which is pretty good. Got it. So, I mentioned Yomi-chan. There's also Language Reactor. There's Migaku, as you all mentioned. There's tons of tools out there right now doing this type of thing. What do you think sets your tool apart? What do you feel like the other tools are doing wrong, and how could they be improved?
Yeah, so I think, specifically what we've seen of like the other tools, I wouldn't say like they're doing wrong. I think, they're definitely, the fact that you're making, subtitles more accessible to learners is a great thing. But I think the thing that we really wanted to focus on was like the fact that, we wanted to teach users like one language at a time. And so instead of building some kind of parser that's kind of generalized to a bunch of languages all at once, what we wanted to do was focus specifically on one language first, specifically Japanese, because we think it's probably one of the hardest ones just because of how ambiguous that language is. But I think that also comes to the fact that a lot of users have been noticing that our parser is, probably one of the most accurate ones that they've seen, especially in terms of recognizing conjugations, but also kind of what we mentioned earlier, but being able to recognize kind of grammar structures as well.
Got it. So to rephrase that, you think that the other tools are trying to tackle too many languages at once?
Yeah, I think that's kind of the first aspect. But I think the second part is also just kind of what we mentioned before, but we really want to make that kind of process as smooth as possible and integrate that with your existing experience. So I think similarly to, I think this is what Duolingo actually does well, which is it really makes that kind of experience easy for you to kind of get in and learn, and kind of gamifies it in a way that you feel kind of accomplished getting what you want done. And so we kind of want to take those aspects of great illustrations, great animations, and also a smooth user experience, also taking in what we've learned at like Robinhood as well, but apply those to the language learning space, where I think we've seen like Language Reactor kind of cuts your whole video to the side to put a whole panel of subtitles on the right or on the left of your screen. What we wanted to do is keep that whole viewing process kind of as is, and just add our subtitles on top. And so if you want to view words later or study words in the future, we have like a separate web app or in video experience that you can do. But our goal is to kind of really kind of integrate ourselves with kind of your existing watching experience. And I think that's kind of also the art of like using a Chrome extension or any kind of browser extension, is they're really kind of integrated in someone's existing experience.
Yeah, definitely. I think that you're totally right. I agree that Duolingo, they really hit the nail on the head as far as making it a smooth and fun experience. More so than I think pretty much any any app out there that I've seen. And I think that's something that in the language learning space is really lacking, because we have so many really talented software developers in the language learning space, especially in Japanese. So you have like tons and tons of Japanese tools, but the process of taking something that is good for someone who is technical and is willing to put up with the initial setup phase and converting into something that is frictionless for a non-technical user is it's a really difficult. It's a challenge, and much more of a challenge than I think people recognize. It's actually quite easy to build the V1 of something that is just like hacked together. It is very difficult to build the public release, general release, accessible for a general audience level of frictionless experience. And it's something that requires a lot of experimentation and testing and user experience testing. So I definitely appreciate your perspective on that.
Definitely, yeah, I agree too. Because we talked to someone and they mentioned their whole pipeline where they have wanted to learn from their game, and they basically had some kind of tool that extracts the text over an HTML page, and then they use like Yomi-chan to get the words, and then they put those into Aki. And so I think there's definitely that set of users who are willing to take the time and build that tool chain for themselves. But there's also this whole set of learners who they kind of want everything all in one. They want everything more smooth for them. And so definitely kind of we wanted to hit the head on with the kind of that philosophy.
Yeah, I know for our clients, we have them install Language Reactor, but it's honestly just to make the subtitles highlightable. And then we have them install Yomi-chan and turn off Language Reactors, like pretty much all of their features except for the subtitling. And it's like, well, this kind of sucks. So I've been talking to my team about potentially using Iago instead. This seems like a simpler approach. We should probably just do this.
Let us know whatever we can build to actually help you with the process. We're happy to figure it out.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, we would definitely want to listen to the learners. And so whatever they want is something that we will end up building.
Cool. Definitely makes sense. Got it. What is Iago's approach and perspective on pitch accent?
Yeah, this one's an interesting one. I feel like it really is, to me, like a your mileage may vary situation, in that it really depends on kind of what your goal is. I think specifically of Japanese, a lot of users tend to kind of hone in and really focus on making sure their pitch accent is perfect, which is great. It's good to kind of focus on making sure you sound kind of native. But I think if your goal really is to kind of just be able to make conversation with someone and understand the language on kind of a general level, that is something that you'll probably end up learning on the fly, and it's something you don't need to, in my opinion, you don't need to focus as much on. I think if your goal in the future is to really assimilate into like the culture and feel like you are really kind of native in the language, that is, and not being thought of as a foreigner, I think that is when it starts becoming a bit more important. But I think, in contrast to tonal languages like Mandarin, Cantonese, where there's multiple tones that can actually, definitely change the definition of like the word you're saying. I think specifically with like these more pitch accent languages, even in English, for example, I think most people can understand like what you're trying to say without having to really focus on the tones and pitches.
Yeah, with that being said, we're also working on making sure that our like pronunciation in the app, like if you hit on the dictionary word and you want to hear how it sounds, that would be accurate as well. We were using like Chrome's native text-to-speech engine, and that works terribly, especially on non-Mac computers. So we actually spent some time to like figure out how do we make it better and actually more naturally.
Got it. Yeah. In our TTS work, we eventually settled on Azure because of all the ones we tried, Azure seems to be the best.
Yeah.
So. But this begs the question, with you're focused on Japanese. Japanese has all of these different complications. What, from your perspective, is the hardest part of parsing and handling Japanese? What technical challenges have you encountered?
I think the most common one, and this is actually pretty common between all the Chinese, Japanese, Korean work, is just that the tokenization is hard because they don't have like segmentation most of the time. You figure out where the word boundary ends, where the next word starts, and is this 3-word character to become a word, or it's 2 and 2 or something. So those are like initial phase you kind of have to get through by trying different techniques and different process and whatever. And then you need to like map it back to the dictionary entries because there are so many definitions for a single word. You kind of need to figure out which exactly is the right one. It could be based on the part of speech that you figured out from the sentence or some other frequencies or something else. And then for Japanese specifically, there's also conjugation. In our cases, we figure out some tenses actually have 2-3 levels of conjugation. So we need to figure out how can we actually combine multiple conjugation together and show you, hey, this is so long because it applies a past polite form and then a passive form or something like that. So those are like a really hard part of like figuring out Japanese, and found this kanji kana also have multiple way to say a kanji as well. That just it's kind of like those 3 things, the main thing that we're encountering when we're writing the backhand for this.
Yeah, no, we've definitely struggled with parsing in several languages. Specifically, in Japanese, there are some pretty decent open source parsers.
Yeah.
Korean, there are not. The parsers for Korean are really bad. So we've been struggling with that one. But yeah, no, Josh did a presentation earlier about how we do our deck pipelines, and we have this long categorization step where somebody has to literally review everything the computer has done and correct it and merge things together. And it's something that humans are really good at and computers are not. Even though we've done an enormous amount of work to teach computers how to understand language through natural language processing. So from your perspective, what's like an interesting technique that you have been using to, parse Japanese? Are you more on the rule-based systems, or are you using an ML engine? What's your approach to tackling these kinds of problems?
I think for now it's a little bit half and half. We do notice some like more glaring bugs that we have to use a rule-based system to fix. They could be like, especially for grammar detections, we basically know that, hey, it has to be a noun and this specific form, and it forms this grammar. We are exploring with some ML techniques, especially probably with grammar. Koreans that's upcoming. We need to figure out some more the ways to parse, like you said, like there's not that many good high quality open source parts out there. They'll probably need to explore some different ways to do it. But for now, we're slightly leaning towards more rule-based system, just because we notice that there are a couple of things that most parts commonly get it wrong, and this is like the least costly way to actually get it fixed.
Got it. Are you relying on an open source parser as sort of like the first pass and then correcting it with a rule-based system?
Yeah, we tried out a couple different ones, and we're trying to figure out which one is the best. Actually, we tried like Ichiran. There is some Sudachi and some others as well. Like you kind of have to like figure it out. How does it integrate your pipeline better than others? So something like Ichiran does it really, really well. Like it parses like super hard conjugations and stuff, but it's also like super heavily rule based, and it kind of conflicts our own rules. It's hard to convert the output or whatever. So it's just a lot of like small technical detail that adds up, and you're like, maybe we should use this parser was slightly worse, but that we can actually fix it to be a better parser in the end.
Yeah, I remember there was cases where when we originally used Ichiran, also I love the names for these parsers, by the way, but when we use Ichiran, I think it does like a greedy, it's more engineering term, but a more kind of greedy approach where it tries to match against kind of the longest phrase it could find first. And there's a lot of cases where you end up getting like overlapped, and it kind of makes sense where you actually have it broken down into more kind of smaller tokens first, and then use kind of what Zero said, something later in kind of our pipeline to kind of stitch it up in the future once we can identify like that matches a particular grammar, for example. Was it just because of the overlap as well? Like I think there's so many, specifically with Japanese, there's like multiple entries that kind of mean the same thing. Like maybe there's a noun form of today, and then or maybe like a noun form of an adjective, and those are two separate entries. And so, and then there's even super long kind of entries that are just kind of better, kind of just broken up. And so I think also to help like our deduping process when you're actually reviewing words, instead of having to review that entire long string and then also have these like separate smaller tokens as like different things to review, at least we can kind of focus on treating them as individual tokens and then using kind of our grammar side to kind of join things together.
Yeah, definitely. It's an interesting approach. I'm not sure how far y'all are planning to go down this rabbit hole, because it is sort of an infinite rabbit hole, right? You can work on this problem forever. And so maybe at a certain point, it's like, you know what, like 95% is good enough, or like 99% is good enough. From our perspective, we are trying to tackle so many different languages that we can't go to that level of perfection on getting the parser work. So we heavily rely on other open source tools, or other tools like yourself that we could potentially partner with and be like, hey, we're not going to build this. It's never going to be a priority for us, but like it's a priority for them. So it'd be great to potentially work on that together, or share that, or maybe open up an API or something like that, where it's like translations or lookups provided by Iago into our system, something like that.
Definitely agree. So that's something that we really wanted to like focus on and make sure that the accuracy is great. But definitely love to see how we can connect more in the future, and
Got it. Cool. So you mentioned that Korean is the next one that you're going to tackle, because it's sort of in that same realm of Japanese, and there isn't a good open source one, right?
Yeah, also, like our idea is that most people actually learn language because they're interested, and in Japan, in America at least, like most people actually learn Japanese and Korean because K-pop, animes, and other stuff. So obviously, Korean is like a huge gaping hole right now that we should support as well.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the Japanese community is really well supported, but we haven't seen. I think the Korean community is growing really fast, but it's not kind of at the level where Japanese is at. And so I think we can start applying some of what we build over there into Korean, and also. Korean will definitely be easier than Japanese, especially because we don't have the kana mapping, even though there's hanja, but it isn't as kind of focused on Korean. So that's kind of also why we want to get into it too.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think looking at Japan and Japanese culture over the past 50 odd years, they've done an amazing job of that sort of soft power, just spreading their culture internationally, especially in America. Like there are so many Japanese fans of Japanese culture and Japanese media, and I do think that Korea, at least in the recent decades, has started to catch on to that trend as well. I saw someone walking around with a t-shirt that said like, "I paused my K-drama for this," and it's like just like walking around on the street.
Right. We're seeing people are trying to learn the songs. Like I'm into like K-pop too, and I have friends that are really into it, and people are just like trying to learn how to sing the songs too. So there's that interest is like growing fast too. So it's great to kind of see how much like just Asian culture is kind of spread amongst globally as well.
Yeah, it's great. Cool. Well, I think that is the end of all of my questions. So we'll leave it with this. But I would like to get sort of some parting thoughts on your part. What are you hoping to see sort of out of the language learning community going forward? What are your hopes and dreams for the tools or the methodologies or just people? What are your hopes for language learning?
Yeah, and I think first off, it's just great to see the fact that Refold has such a large community of learners. Even listening to the stream and hearing kind of all the different communities, different countries, and how kind of global it is kind of really remarkable to see all these people putting in the work to improve kind of language as a whole. But secondly, I think one thing that's really great as well is the kind of new focus on immersion-based kind of tools. I think originally in the past, it was the Rosetta Stones, Duolingos, and kind of the similar kind of not really flashcard, but kind of easy kind of textbook as an app-based tools that existed in the past. And it's great to see how a lot of people are really trying to kind of automate or make smoother the way of kind of learning a language through like immersion, which is how a lot of people actually learn languages, actually like right now, where people to go to the country and try to learn a language. And so I think it would be great to see in the future how, you know, that becomes more ubiquitous. I think like language learning as a whole is probably one of the only types of like subjects that you would learn where you kind of get a bit of it every kind of thing you touch in a way. Like if you're learning like chemistry or some kind of science, you know, you're really focused on your chemistry textbook and you're in a lab trying to learn. But language is something where you're kind of walking around, you learn some bits and parts of language as you go. You're reading a magazine, you're watching a book, watching a TV show, reading a book. There's all these different ways you can kind of absorb language from, and I really want to see, you know, how that gets connected and becomes more ubiquitous in the future.
Cool. And you, Zero?
For me, I'm just like happy to see how far the learning space has already evolved. Since I was like learning English, I had to carry around like a small electronic dictionary thing, and then only have subtitle basically that I can use, and have to write down every word I don't know, look it up in that dictionary, and come back to it, and make cards myself physically, not even Anki. It's just a whole new different world now already, and what I'm really hoping for is just like enabling more people with access to this brand new tools assisted learning system.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Alex. Thank you so much, Zero, for coming on and telling us about Iago. If you're curious to try Iago, we'll leave a link in the description. Thank you so much for watching, everybody out there, and we will see you for the next one.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you for having us. Really appreciate it.